If we proceed as we are trying to right now, and we go to war with Iran, which seems to be the widespread wish on the Hill by everybody, Russia is not going to stand by and allow Iran to take us on alone. Remember, Iran has stood by Russia throughout the Ukraine conflict. That means that Russia will also probably back the Turks when the Turks decide to enter, although we know that Mr. Putin has urged Mr. Erdogan to reconsider and have some patience and give it time. Whether or not Mr. Erdogan will follow that advice, I don't know. But if the Iranians and the Turks are both committed, I suspect that Russia will stand by them. Now, will Russia directly confront us? I don't know. But you can get very confused at sea in the Mediterranean. You've already got Russian vessels out there, not very many, certainly Russian submarines. You have Turkish vessels and Turkish submarines. I don't know what else is out there besides us and the Israelis, but it's a small area. I mean, if you're an admiral in the U.S. Navy, you look at the Eastern Mediterranean and say, this place is a puddle. Where does the United States Navy like to operate? The Pacific and the Atlantic. There's plenty of space. That's where we enjoy a huge strategic advantage over anyone else in the world. We don't have that in the Mediterranean. So I think there's thinking in Washington finally that perhaps we've gone too far too fast. But if you're going to restrain Mr. Netanyahu, you have to tell him, look, either you agree to a ceasefire, we sit down, we come up with a conference to sort this child out, or we withdraw our carriers, which means he's on his own. And remember, from his standpoint, the carriers are vital if he is going to take on Hezbollah simultaneously. That's his biggest worry in the short run. Of course, Hezbollah shrinks to not insignificance, but to a much smaller problem if he has to deal with both Turkey and Iran.
And to what degree now does public opinion, how is it influenced, in your view, by what has happened with the emergence of such strong anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian radicalism on college campuses, university campuses, the national media, and the Democrat Party, which is obviously aligned with them?
Well, it's funny you bring that up. A friend of mine, he's a nice person. He's made lots of money. I've known him for about 40 years. And he said, Doug, where did all these Muslims come from? How could this happen? What is going on these campuses? And I said, well, you know, we've had a problem. It's called immigration. Immigration is coming back to haunt us. We've invited legally and illegally all sorts of people into the country who have agendas that are fundamentally antithetical to our interests. In other words, they're bringing their conflicts, their hatreds, their bitterness with them into the United States. Same thing is happening in Europe. We are obviously, and I certainly am, inclined to support Israel. I want to see Israel survive. My concern is that we're not acting in a way that would help Israel save itself. We're in fact encouraging the Israelis to go down full speed ahead into hell, a hell from which they may not emerge. There are almost 90 million Turks. You have almost the same number of people in Iran. You start running the math. You really think 6 million Israelis are going to prevail? It doesn't make any sense. And under the circumstances, the Israelis have violated one of their own principles. Always try to pit your enemies against each other. And if you can't do that, then try to fight one at a time. Well, they've blown it. They've united the Sunni and Shia 100% against them in a very short period of time. And I don't think it's a battle I'd want to take on under any circumstances. It's a loser from my standpoint. And, you know, you ask about public opinion. Public opinion in the Muslim world is obvious. Public opinion in the United States, that's hard to gauge. How enthusiastic will Americans be about being drawn into a major regional war? How long before somebody figures out that we have almost no army? How are we going to field something that will make a difference? Where are we going to put these troops? How do they enter the theater? We always bet, or at least depended upon, access to Egypt in order to get to Israel's support with ground forces. How do we get them in now? What are our interests? Is it in our interest to go to war with the Muslim world? No, I don't think it is. That doesn't mean we support them. We absolutely support Israel. It means that we recognize the limitations on our power and abilities. The people in Washington don't seem to have any sense of limitations, none whatsoever. And as far as Mr. Biden is concerned, I think he's a cutout. I'm not sure he has much of a role whatsoever. He reads what's put in front of him. He listens to what people decide to tell him, and he moves. I think that there's a group of people that we don't even know with absolute certainty who are running affairs, but certainly Mr. Blinken in the State Department talks and acts a lot like the commander-in-chief. Even though there's big support for the Israelis to punish their opponents, you have to step back and think about the consequences of this total war of annihilation that Mr. Netanyahu wants to wage. You know, there was an attempt, I'm told, by Mr. Blinken to come up with some sort of relocation plan for the people in Gaza. All of the Muslim countries were appalled. They were repelled by that idea. They said, this is their home. This is where they live. You're not going to drive them out. We are seeing much of the world return to normalcy. Who are the two major powers in the Middle East over the last 5,000 years? Persia, and certainly then after Persia, I would say Turkey for the last 1,000. And the Turks have been a dominant force. They came out of Central Asia. They survived the Mongolian invasions. In other words, these are very powerful figures, powerful people, powerful culture. And they are Muslims. They're not all radical Muslims by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, Turkish Islam was on the whole fairly moderate compared with the Arabs. But we're dealing with a different set of circumstances because what's happening in Gaza is enraging the entire Muslim world. This is not just another war in the Middle East between Israel, Egypt, Syria, or southern Lebanon. This is a very different animal. This is a civilizational confrontation now. And that is due largely to Mr. Netanyahu and his government that has tried to transform this into a much larger fight.
Another story that I wanted to get your thoughts on that I'm having a hard time reading between the lines is they're saying that Putin's health is going downhill quickly. This might be the reason that Russia needs to end the war. Close allies, anonymous allies within the Kremlin say his health is falling apart. He realizes he's been beaten and he's humiliated. Is this Western media propaganda, or are you hearing anything about Putin's health actually deteriorating?
No, I have a great deal of difficulty with this. Mr. Putin, I think, is 69. He looks awfully good for 69. Seems to be very healthy and dynamic. Now, is there something else going on that we don't know about? Perhaps there is, but we've been treated to these rumors of Putin's imminent demise now for about the last 3 or 4 years. So I suspect there's lots of wishful thinking in the West, which is misguided, by the way, because Putin is probably the single most well-informed person inside Russia about the West. He understands the West. He understands us. This is a man who's exercised extraordinary restraint. Just the other day, somebody said, well, you keep talking about the powerful Russian forces. If that's the case, why haven't they, run up to the river, cross the river, and march to Poland? I said, because that's not what Putin wants. Putin would like to end this war. He's sitting on territory right now that is historically Russian, with Russian-speaking populations. He's going to move and take Kharkov. He will take Odessa. Those things will occur in time. But he doesn't want a war with the West or with NATO or with anybody. He just wants to get those territories under his control, get the Russians in them inside Russia, and then prevent any further oppression of the Russian population or the Tatars or anybody else inside Ukraine. That's it. He would like to see Ukraine as a neutral state. He's certainly not going to sit there and put up one more time with what we did over the last 10 years or so in Ukraine. He's not going to allow Ukraine to become this fortress for American imperial influence and NATO influence.